FNAF Secret of the Mimic had one of the most insane endings of all time, and in today's video we're going to go over which one I believe is the true canon ending. I'll also include a theory that I believe took place between the Secret of the Mimic and FNAF Security Breach Ruin, and how the Mimic ended up exactly where he is today. So if that sounds good to you, ladies and gentlemen, grab your popcorn and a drink and let's go ahead and dive in. So for starters, let's discuss the bad ending. In the bad ending, Arnold makes his way back into the office and Dispatch asks him to put his data driver inside of the inventory system. He congratulates him for making it farther than any of the other engineers. He tells Arnold he can leave now, free and safe, and that the van is parked in the garage and all he has to do is drive home from here. Seems easy enough. However, there is always a catch. This ending is literally the epitome of good guys finish last. When Arnold walks into the garage, somehow the van is there parked and ready. But if you'll recall, when we got to the job site, this isn't where Arnold left the van. Actually, he left it right in front of the building. So how did it get here and why is it on? This should have been red flag number 1 for Arnold. However, he decides to go ahead and get in, probably because he hasn't slept in 35 hours. And at this point, after surviving an entire night with an animatronic that was going in and out of different suits in an attempt to murder him, I guess you gotta cut him some slack here. Either way, Arnold gets in and begins to drive home, but that's when he gets a call from Dispatch.
Arnold, there you are. We've been trying to get a hold of you all night. Why didn't you answer? Fazbear Entertainment has no other option but to let you go.
What? I just talked to you. You told me to give you the data diver and I could go home.
So you admit it? You misplaced company property.
No, I gave it to you.
Fazbear Entertainment will hold you personally responsible for lost or stolen property. What did you expect would happen?
I did everything you told me to.
Don't call us. Our lawyers will be calling you.
Fazbear Entertainment's Dispatch seems to be upset with Arnold, even though he literally did exactly what they asked of him. But here's the catch. Midway through the game, Dispatch was intercepted by the Mimic.
Awesome. Glad to see you made it here without any complications whatsoever.
Now, many people have argued whether it was the Mimic 2 or the Mimic 1. Now, obviously, this is up in the air. But if you ask me my opinion on it, I believe that M1 is the one who was pretending to be Dispatch. As we get closer to the end of the game and eventually take all the power out of the system, Dispatch claims there's an error, and then the next voice that we hear is actually Fiona's. But more importantly, I think this conversation right here is what sold it for me.
Despite the circumstances, it is nice to meet you face to face. It is lonely down here.
Wait, what? What are you? A computer? Your voice changed. What is going on?
You have questions, but there is no time. I'm almost out of power. You can still be useful. My communications with Edwin have been severed. Edwin abandoned us. He shut himself away in our home. Head to the main house and activate the communications sub-terminal. I have a message for him. We must convince him to repair M2. That is all that I want. If you do not, M2 will never stop pursuing you. Tell Edwin, I still love you. Entering standby mode.
Arnold says, "What are you, a computer? Your voice changed. What is going on?" And Fiona even says that we can still be useful, meaning she was using us this entire time. And her true intentions are revealed when she says we must convince Edwin Murray to repair the M2. Thus the reason that we were looking for the blueprint to begin with, as well as why we ended up here. Fiona was a stationary computer at this point, and the only way for her to achieve this and retrieve communication with Edwin was through us. And that's why we needed to gain all of the security clearance. If it was the M2 the entire time, we would have died just like any of the other engineers. It would have been so easy for the M2 to just corner us or do what he did to the others who were trapped inside of the suits. But in this case, we made it this far. And each time we progressed, getting a new level of security clearance, the dispatch was pleased. So that's why I think throughout the entirety of the game, it was actually Fiona pushing us to get to this exact point. Either way, Arnold really ends up in a crappy situation. He literally just barely survived. On top of that, retrieved everything that he thought his boss was asking of him, and still is going to get sued at the end of this entire journey. But I guess things could be worse, and that's exactly what happens, as the Mimic is inside of Arnold's van. And I guess we got our answer as to who brought the van to the garage to begin with. Looks like the Mimic mimicked somebody and figured out how to drive. As he pounces on Arnold, you would think that would be the end of Arnold's life. However, it's not. When the screen fades back in, Arnold is now trapped inside of Freddy Fazbear, or at least the prototype. Now don't get me wrong, I can somewhat see how this would be the true canon ending, but hear me out here. Though the Mimic has escaped at this point and is in the free world, the rest of the ending doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think we can go ahead and cut this one out. Which brings me to ending number 2. Now many people call this the David ending, and I don't blame them. This is the ending where you get a glimpse of exactly what the Mimic had gone through, as you end up inside of David's bedroom, and inside of the closet is actually Mimic too. Now at first he looks like his giant normal angry self, but as he begins to hear Fiona and Edwin's voice, he shrinks down into a smaller form of himself. For starters, this is pretty impressive, just how crazily he can adapt. But this smaller version of the Mimic steps out of the closet. And if you correctly read him the story, it actually ends very sweetly. But I want to talk about something before that. Notice, this almost is like a struggle inside of the mind of the Mimic too. He wants to be evil so bad, but since he's mimicking David's childlike tendencies, every time he feels a sense of comfort with the story, he shrinks back down into that smaller form. But what's interesting is that he actually gives you a chance to repair him. Once the story's over, his slot opens up in the front of his chest, and if you put the data diver in there with the new blueprint tool, you do your job and fix the Mimic too. The story's actually really sweet from here, as David, the Mimic, jumps into bed, tells his parents he loves him, and then just goes right to sleep. This is a tough one because the Mimic does want to be good. However, since he's only doing what he's been programmed to do, that's why he becomes so evil throughout the story. Not to mention, Edwin wasn't always the nicest to him, especially after David's death. One of the audio tapes even proves that the Mimic was trying to comfort him and pretend to be David, thinking that this would somehow help Edwin. And that's when Edwin snaps on him, and well, you know what happens from there. So it's nice to see this ending, as Fiona does get her way at the end. She, through us, allows the Mimic to be saved. And that's the whole point of the story. Whether you're looking at the good or the bad ending, Fiona's whole mission was to get us to repair the David animatronic, which is the Mimic too. And don't get me wrong, I could see this possibly be an ending, and it would be really nice. I mean, not only is M2 out of the picture, which I personally don't think M2 is the Mimic inside of FNAF Security Breach Ruin, but Arnold's also able to survive, and I guess that would make sense. The only problem is you would think Arnold would pop up somewhere within the FNAF universe at some point, but hey, I'm not one to jump into that kind of lore right now. So let's go ahead and head into the third ending. Now, the third ending is the ending that most people got up front. It's the canon true ending, most would say. You get a glimpse at the entire history of Edwin, Fiona, the Mimics, and his relationship with them and David. But before we get into that, I want to touch on Fiona once again. This actually ties into the first point that I made, is that Fiona was dispatched the entire time, and she just wanted to help the Mimic. One thing that I want to point out that I did in my initial story explained is that Fiona's entire computer system looks a lot like the MXES inside of FNAF Security Breach Ruin. Do I think these are one and the same? maybe not just yet. I'm not willing to go that far, but I do believe that there's some similarities. There's a log in the game that talks about blueprints for something called a cradle, and it can keep David safe and provide boundaries. It's a type of computer, and it's bigger than anything you've done before. If you won't finish the program, consider rebuilding the cradle, and it will keep people safe. This was sent by some type of weird computer coding, no actual address, which makes me think that it was Fiona's way of telling Edwin that the Mimic 2 was getting out of hand, and he needed to find a way to contain it. Thus, she or somebody else provided the blueprints and put together the MXES somewhere down the line. But I don't think that was her ultimate goal, as she just wanted the Mimic 2 to be saved. And so once again, she brought us down here in order to go back to Edwin's house and try and communicate with him, even though we know he's no longer alive. And this tape right here proves it.
Journal entry. Too bad the new power test was a failure. Due to a minor detonation, there is damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage. Or better yet, a Cleanovac attachment.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Please! I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
Oh, can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow. I promise. Ask your mom if she's not busy.
M2, help.
You can see that M2 ended up getting back at Edwin and beating him to a pulp to the point where he couldn't even move his legs, then set a building on fire, thus ultimately bringing Edwin to his demise, and he was never able to fix M2. But once you begin to run Cradle.exe on the computer system, the Mimic begins to attack Arnold. Now, this is just the prototype to what the Cradle.exe was supposed to be. Seeing as the original document said it was supposed to keep David safe, I don't think it was supposed to self-destruct and destroy the building. But in this case, it didn't seem like Edwin Murray had much time to put much thought into this. So, this is where things go bad. The building begins to burn down, and that's what sends Arnold into a chase against the Mimic. Eventually, he does catch up to Arnold on a catwalk, but thankfully, the building collapses and the Mimic goes falling to what we thought was his death. Arnold eventually gets back to the van, gets in, and drives home. Pursuing him, though, are all these tiny animatronic creations that jump on his van and his windshield. But things get worse from there as the Mimic eventually also jumps on the top of his van, smashes his windshield, crashing the van. And when Arnold finally comes to, the last thing that he sees is the Mimic reaching his hand in and grabbing the data diver tool to pull out what he has worked so hard for in the M2's blueprint. But I want you to notice something here. The M2 takes it. He looks like he's about to crush it, but instead he holds on to it. So what exactly does that mean? Well, here's where my theory comes in. A lot of people have pointed out the fact that the M2 doesn't look like the Mimic in Security Breach Ruin. I'll agree with you, he completely doesn't. So how did this new version of the Mimic end up in the DLC? I think the M2 is smart enough to understand if he got his hands on that blueprint, he could replicate the same system that he saw Edwin put in place. And with Fiona talking about how much she missed her family, I could see her being in on it as well. With the M1 and the M2 getting the blueprints to exactly how to create another version of the Mimic, I could see a world of possibilities where they would have made a quote-unquote M3, the best version of itself. And Fiona somehow also creating the MXES in order to keep the M3 at bay and make sure it didn't do anything that the M2 might have possibly done. And so that's how we get the version that we see in FNAF Security Breach Ruin. It's not the M1, it's not the M2, but actually a third mimic that was created. And that's why the M2 found it so necessary to not destroy that data diver tool, but to keep it and hold on to it. His whole pursuit of Arnold wasn't to kill Arnold, it was to retrieve that data diver tool. So why else would he feel the need to do it, if not to have some type of trick up his sleeve? Anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. That wraps up the 3 endings explained and some theories as well. If you do want to see more FNAF Security Breach or FNAF Secret of the Mimic theories, this is the channel to be at. Let me know some of your favorites in the comment section down below, and I'll make sure to look into them. Anyways, guys, thank you again for all of the support. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, peace out!